There is a word you use every month without thinking about it. Salary. It comes from the Latin salarium, which comes from sal, which means salt. You have probably heard what that supposedly means. Roman soldiers were paid in salt. It was so valuable it worked as money. Worth its weight in gold, people say. It's a great story. Historians are not convinced by it. Roman soldiers were paid in coins. We have the payroll records. Salt in Rome was cheap. A common man could afford it. So the most famous fact about salt is probably wrong. Which raises a better question. Why did everyone want to believe it? Because something about it feels true. And the real story is stranger than the myth. Salt is the only rock human beings eat. It has started wars. It has funded empires. And it is still running a program inside your body right now. Start with the biology, because everything else comes from it. Your body runs on sodium. Every nerve signal, every muscle contraction, every heartbeat. Sodium moves across your cell membranes to make electricity. You are, functionally, a saltwater animal in a leather bag. And here's the problem. Your body cannot make sodium. It can only lose it. Sweat, tears, urine. So it must be found, constantly, from outside. Which is why animals do insane things to get it. On Mount Elgon in Kenya, elephants walk into a cave. In total darkness, hundreds of meters underground. And they mine the wall with their tusks. For salt. Every night. For thousands of years. The cave was partly dug by elephants. Deer, cattle, goats, butterflies, all of them hunt salt. Because plants are terrible at holding sodium. Meat is not. Meat is full of it. Which is why hunter-gatherers barely thought about salt. They ate animals. Animals came pre-salted. Then humans did something that broke this. They started farming. And their diet flipped from mostly meat to mostly grain. Grain is almost sodium-free. For the first time, human beings were running short. And the brain has a dedicated alarm for this. A tiny cluster of neurons at the base of the brainstem. When sodium drops, a hormone called aldosterone rises. Those neurons switch on, and they do not negotiate. They do not make you hungry. They make you desperate. Animals deprived of salt will drink water they normally refuse. It is not a preference. It is a survival circuit. And this is where the story stops being about your body and starts being about power. Because if a substance is required, and it only comes from a few places on Earth, then whoever holds those places holds everyone else. But salt wasn't only food. Salt was technology. Before refrigeration, food had one enemy: time. Meat rots in days. A harvest rots in weeks. Salt stops that. It pulls the water out. And bacteria cannot live in a desert. Which means salt does something almost supernatural. It lets you keep summer inside a barrel until February. And that changes what a civilization can physically do. An army can march for months instead of days. A ship can cross an ocean instead of hugging a coast. A city can survive a winter it did not grow food for. Basque fishermen salted cod and sailed to Newfoundland. Northern Europe ran on salted herring for centuries. The Hanseatic League grew rich moving fish and salt. Venice did not begin with glass or art. It began with salt pans in a lagoon. Control the salt, then by the trade, then by the city. One of the oldest roads into Rome is called the Via Salaria, the Salt Road, named for what moved along it. And across the Sahara, salt slabs traveled by camel. From mines at Tagaza, where buildings were made of salt. South, into cities where salt was scarce and gold was not. There, and only there, the exchange rate got close. Which is where the worth its weight in gold line was born. Not because salt was precious everywhere, but because it was priceless where it was missing. Now put yourself in the position of a king. You need money. Constantly. Forever. Tax land, and the poor pay nothing. Tax trade, and merchants take a different road. Tax income, and everyone lies. But there is one thing nobody can opt out of. Rich or poor, loyal or rebellious, everyone needs salt. And it comes out of a small number of holes in the ground, which makes it the most controllable commodity in history. China worked this out in the 7th century BC. A minister named Guanzhong proposed a state monopoly. Don't tax the people. Just sell them the salt. They will never see the tax. They will simply pay it. For centuries, salt revenue funded a large share of the state. Armies, walls, canals, paid for with a mineral. Europe learned the same lesson. In France, the salt tax had a name: the gabelle. And it was one of the most hated things in the kingdom. It was not just expensive, it was compulsory. In some regions, every person over 8 years old had to buy a fixed quantity of salt every year from the state, at the state's price, whether they needed it or not. And the price varied wildly from province to province, which created the obvious business opportunity. Buy cheap on one side of a line, sell dear on the other. Salt smuggling became a mass occupation. Smugglers were called fauconniers. Thousands were arrested every year. Some were sent to the galleys. Men rode until they died for moving a mineral across a line. Even dogs were used, fitted with pouches, trained to run the route. Guards shot the dogs. When the French Revolution came, the gabelle was on the list. It was abolished in 1790, to enormous celebration. Napoleon brought it back 16 years later, because he needed money, and it worked. It was finally abolished in 1945. That is not ancient history. That is your grandparents. And the biggest salt story of all is even more recent. India, under British rule. India has thousands of kilometers of coastline. Seawater evaporates. Salt appears. Free. Forever. It was illegal to pick it up. The British salt monopoly made producing your own salt a crime. You had to buy taxed salt. In a country of extreme poverty. In a climate where people sweat out sodium all day. Gandhi looked at this and saw something perfect. Not because salt was the worst injustice, but because it was the one everybody understood instantly. On the 12th of March, 1930, he started walking. Roughly 380 kilometers. To the sea. He started with a few dozen people. By the end, the column stretched for kilometers. On the 6th of April, he reached the beach at Dundee. He bent down and picked up a lump of salted mud. That was the crime. And then the entire coast did it. Tens of thousands were arrested in the following weeks. An empire spent months arresting people for touching the beach. In front of the world's newspapers. It did not end British rule that year. But it showed everyone watching exactly what the rule was. A government that has to police salt is not defending order. It is defending a revenue stream. So for about 10,000 years, salt meant power. And then, within a single lifetime, it stopped. Industrial mining. Mechanical drilling. Global shipping. Salt went from a strategic resource to the cheapest thing on the shelf. Today you can buy a kilogram of it for less than a coffee. Most of it isn't even eaten. It goes on roads, into chemicals, into industry. The empire maker became a de-icing product. And here is the part that matters. Your brain never got the memo. That ancient alarm circuit is still switched on. It was built for a world where salt was almost impossible to find. It now operates in a world where salt is unavoidable. And there is an industry that knows this precisely. In food science, there is a concept called the bliss point. The exact concentration at which a taste is most rewarding. Too little, and it's bland. Too much, and you stop. Products are engineered to sit on that peak. Not to taste good. To be hard to stop eating. And salt does 3 jobs at once for a manufacturer. 1. It hides bitterness. Cheap ingredients taste unpleasant. Salt covers that up. 2. It makes you thirsty. Salted snacks sell drinks. That's not an accident. 3. It hits the one circuit that never says no. Now here's the number most people get wrong. When people worry about salt, they look at the shaker. In many countries, the shaker is a small fraction of it. Around 70% comes from processed and restaurant food. It was already in there before you touched it. Bread is one of the largest sources. Bread. Not because bread tastes salty. Because you eat it every day. The World Health Organization suggests under 5 grams a day. Global average intake is roughly double that, which your kidneys handle by raising blood pressure. Quietly. For decades. Without a symptom. High blood pressure is one of the largest risk factors for early death worldwide. And here's the cruel part. You cannot feel your sodium level. There is no gauge. The system that tells you to seek salt has no upper limit. It evolved for scarcity. It was never given a break. Because for 10,000 years, it never needed one. So look at what actually happened here. A mineral your body cannot make and cannot live without. Concentrated in a few places on the planet. Which meant that for most of recorded history, somebody always stood between you and it. A king, a monopoly, an empire, a tax collector, and they never had to persuade you to buy it. Your own brainstem did the selling. Today nobody is guarding the salt. It's 4 cents a kilo. The monopoly is gone. The circuit is not. So it gets used by whoever is selling you something now. You were never bad at resisting salt. You were built to chase it, in a world that ran out of it. That world ended about a century ago. Nobody told your brainstem. And nobody is going to.